The roar of the city below was a constant hum in the background of my life, a reminder of how far I'd come. I sat in my penthouse office, the walls lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a sweeping view of the skyline. It was a view I'd once only dreamed of, and yet it had become as familiar to me as the air I breathed. Success had a way of numbing you to the very things you once craved. I leaned back in my chair, fingers drumming absently on the polished mahogany desk as I stared out at the glittering lights. The city was alive, pulsating with energy, but for all its vibrancy, it couldn't fill the void that had settled in my chest. It was a strange thing to admit, even to myself, but there was a loneliness that success couldn't erase, a lingering emptiness that no amount of wealth or power could fill. Growing up in the cramped, run-down apartment on the wrong side of town, I had learned early on that dreams were a luxury. My father had worked himself into an early grave, his hands calloused from years of manual labor, his spirit crushed by the relentless grind of poverty. My mother did what she could, juggling multiple jobs just to keep food on the table. But it was never enough. There was always too much month left at the end of the money. Our apartment was a haphazard collection of second-hand furniture and faded memories, the walls thin enough that you could hear every argument, every sigh of frustration, every sob muffled into a pillow. It was a place where hope was something whispered in the dark, too fragile to survive the harsh light of day. And yet, it was in those very shadows that my ambition was born. I was 8 years old when I discovered the power of escape. It came in the form of a tattered book I'd found in a junk shop, its spine cracked and its pages yellowed with age. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That book was my first taste of freedom, a glimpse into a world where anything was possible. I devoured it in a single night, reading by the dim light of a flickering bowl, while my siblings slept in the bed we all shared. That was the night I made a promise to myself. I would not be like my father, worn down by life, until there was nothing left but regret. I would not be like my mother, whose eyes held a sadness she tried so hard to hide. No, I would carve out a different path, one that led far away from the suffocating confines of our tiny apartment. My first chance to escape came when I was 14. My best friend, Louise, and I decided to hitchhike to a neighboring city, a place that, to us, might as well have been a different planet. We had no money, no plan, just a hunger for adventure that burned hotter than the midday sun. We walked for hours, our feet blistered and our throats parched, but we didn't care. We were free. When we finally arrived, exhausted and exhilarated, we found a small, run-down hotel on the outskirts of town. It was nothing special. Peeling paint, a flickering neon sign, and a surly desk clerk who looked like he hadn't smiled in years. But to me, it was magical. For the first time in my life, I had a space that was entirely mine, a place where I could close the door and shut out the world. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress listening to the distant sounds of the city, I knew I had found my calling. Hotels were more than just buildings. They were sanctuaries, places where people could escape, even if only for a night. I spent the rest of that summer sketching out my ideas in a notebook I'd begged my mother to buy me. Treehouse hotels, underwater hotels, even hotels in space. I imagined them all, and I swore that one day I would bring those dreams to life. But dreams alone weren't enough. I knew that if I wanted to escape the cycle of poverty, I would have to fight for it. School became my battleground. While other kids played soccer or hung out at the local arcade, I buried myself in textbooks, determined to outwork everyone else. My teachers noticed, and for the first time, I felt the thrill of recognition. They encouraged me, pushed me, even suggested I consider a career in design and architecture. It was all the validation I needed. The next few years were a blur of late nights and early mornings, my eyes gritty with fatigue, but my mind buzzing with possibilities. I applied for every scholarship I could find, pouring my heart into essays that detailed my plans to revolutionize the hotel industry. When the acceptance letter from the architecture program at the State University finally arrived, it was like a lifeline had been thrown to me in the midst of a storm. I was going to make it out. But the university was a different world, one where wealth and privilege were the norm. I was an outsider, the poor kid from the wrong side of town who didn't belong. It didn't take long for me to fall for someone who did. Asira was everything I wasn't. Beautiful, confident, and effortlessly rich. She had an air of detachment that drove me wild, a sense of untouchable grace that made her seem like she existed in a different realm. I was hopelessly in love before I even realized what was happening. I spent my scholarship money on flowers and dinners, desperately trying to win her over. And for a while, it seemed like I had. She let me into her world, let me believe that maybe, just maybe, I was worthy of her attention. But it was all a facade. She was playing with me, using me to pass the time until someone better came along. When she left me for one of the wealthier students, a smug, arrogant bastard who treated her like a trophy, it nearly broke me. But instead of letting it destroy me, I let it fuel me. I promised myself that I would become so successful, so powerful, that no one would ever be able to hurt me like that again. That promise became my mantra. I threw myself into my studies, graduating with honors and landing a job at one of the top construction firms in the country. It wasn't long before I struck out on my own, determined to build my empire. The early years were brutal, long hours, endless setbacks, and more than a few sleepless nights where I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. But I kept going, driven by the memory of Asara's laughter as she walked away from me. My first hotel was a modest affair, a glass tower on the edge of the city that barely broke even. But it was mine, and with each new project, I refined my vision, turning my childhood sketches into reality. A hotel shaped like a ship, another like an octopus, and eventually my crowning achievement, a luxury hotel built into the side of a mountain that attracted the world's elite. By the time I turned 35, I was a millionaire several times over, my name synonymous with innovation and success in the hotel industry. But with every new accomplishment, the satisfaction grew more fleeting. The more I achieved, the less it seemed to matter. The penthouse office, the luxury cars, the exclusive parties. It all felt hollow, a distraction from the one thing I could never seem to grasp: love. I had avoided relationships since Asira, keeping everyone at arm's length, afraid of being hurt again. But as I sat in my office that night, staring out at the city that had once felt like the answer to all my prayers, I couldn't ignore the nagging emptiness any longer. I had everything I had ever wanted, except for someone to share it with. I shook off the thought, forcing myself to focus on the present. There was no room for sentimentality in my life. I had built my empire on the foundation of discipline and hard work, not emotion. And yet, as the city lights twinkled in the distance, I couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, I had been wrong. For all my success, all my power, I was still that kid in the cramped apartment, longing for something more. And for the first time in years, I wondered if the price I had paid for my ambition had been too high. But before I could dwell on it any longer, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was David, and as I answered, I knew that whatever he had to say would be enough to bury those unsettling thoughts. After all, there was always another deal, another challenge, another way to prove that I was still in control. And I was determined to stay in control, no matter the cost. The moment I answered David's call, I could tell something was different. His voice, usually calm and measured, had a crackle of excitement, a barely contained energy that set my nerves on edge. "Michael, we have an opportunity that could catapult us to the next level," he began, his words tumbling out with a sense of urgency that was unusual for him. I leaned back in my chair, trying to mirror the calm I didn't quite feel. "What is it this time, David?" I asked, my tone deliberately casual. But inside, my heart was already picking up speed. David wasn't one to overstate things, so when he said, "next level," I knew it wasn't hyperbole. He paused for effect, and I could almost see the smirk that was likely playing on his lips. "Leonardo Russo," he finally said, dropping the name like a bomb. I sat up straight, the name slicing through my thoughts like a knife. Leonardo Russo was a legend in our industry, a man whose mere interest in a project could skyrocket its value overnight. Russo's reputation preceded him, an Italian magnate with a vast portfolio that spanned hotels, resorts, and high-end properties across Europe and Asia. He was as ruthless as he was successful, and anyone who got on his bad side didn't stay in business for long. "You've got my attention," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden adrenaline rush. "What's the deal?" David's laugh was low, almost conspiratorial. "Russo's interested in expanding into North America, and he's looking for partners who can help him make a splash. He's been following our projects, Michael. He likes what we've done, especially the Mountain Hotel. He sees us as the kind of innovative thinkers he needs on his side." I could already see the possibilities. Joint ventures, cross-continent collaborations, our brand plastered across some of the most luxurious destinations in the world. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that could cement my legacy, the kind of deal that didn't just make money, but made history. But there was something in David's tone, a slight hesitation that made me pause. "There's a catch, isn't there?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. David sighed, a sound that seemed to convey both excitement and frustration. "There's always a catch, Michael. Russo's old school. He's not just looking for business partners, he's looking for family men, people he can trust on a personal level. He insists on meeting with his partners and their fiancés." The words hung in the air like a lead weight, and I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. "Fiancés." I repeated, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. "Or wives," David clarified, though it didn't help. "But fiancés are preferable. Russo believes in building relationships through family ties. It's his way of ensuring loyalty and integrity. A fiancé. The idea was absurd. I had spent the last decade building walls around my personal life, keeping everyone at a safe distance, never letting anyone get close enough to become a distraction. I didn't do relationships, much less engagements. The very thought of pretending to be engaged felt like a betrayal of everything I had worked for. "And how exactly do you expect me to find a fiancé by next week?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. David had known me long enough to understand the impossibility of what he was asking. He chuckled, but there was an edge of unease to it. "By using that famous Delgado charm, of course. Look, I know it's not ideal, but this is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. Russo is a big fish, and if we land him, we're set for life. I've already talked to Isabella, and she's on board to play the role for me. You just need to find someone to play yours." Isabella, of course. David's girlfriend was stunning, intelligent, and most importantly, completely devoted to him. She'd jump at the chance to help him secure a deal like this. But I wasn't David. I didn't have someone waiting in the wings, ready to step into a role I had never even considered casting. "David, this is insane," I muttered, rubbing a hand over my face as I tried to think. "I don't even know where to start." "Start with what you know," David suggested, his voice turning pragmatic. "You've built your life around solving problems, Michael. This is just another problem to solve. Think of it like a business deal. You don't need to fall in love. You just need to find someone who can play the part convincingly." He made it sound so simple, but the reality was anything but. The idea of introducing someone into my life, even temporarily, felt like inviting chaos into my meticulously controlled world. But as much as I hated to admit it, David was right. This was a problem, and like every other problem I had faced, I needed to find a solution, fast. "I'll figure something out," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. "But David, you better be damn sure about this. If Russo finds out we're deceiving him." "He won't," David assured me quickly. "Russo may be sharp, but he's also sentimental. He wants to believe in the people he works with. As long as we play our cards right, he'll never suspect a thing." I wasn't so sure. Russo was the kind of man who didn't just look at the surface. He dug deep, searching for weaknesses, for any hint of deception. If I made one wrong move, the entire deal could crumble, taking my reputation with it. After I hung up the phone, I sat there for a long moment, staring out at the city, which had taken on a more sinister edge in the dying light. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, and the risk of failure loomed large. But the thought of what I stood to gain, of what it would mean to secure a partnership with Leonardo Russo, was enough to push me forward. I spent the rest of the night going over potential candidates in my mind, a mental checklist of qualities and attributes that Russo might find appealing. The woman I chose would have to be intelligent, poised, and adaptable. She'd need to be able to navigate the high-pressure world of business dinners and negotiations without breaking a sweat. And most importantly, she'd need to understand that this was nothing more than a temporary arrangement. A business transaction, nothing more. But finding someone like that on such short notice was proving to be a challenge. By the next morning, I had reviewed dozens of options. Women I had met through work, acquaintances from industry events, even some old flames who might be willing to do me a favor. But none of them fit the bill. They were either too close to my world or too far removed from it. I needed someone who was both an insider and an outsider, someone who could blend seamlessly into the role without drawing too much attention. As the week wore on, my frustration grew. Every meeting, every interview felt like a waste of time. The women were either too eager, their eyes lighting up at the thought of being linked to a wealthy businessman, or too distant, treating the whole thing as if it were beneath them. By Friday, I was no closer to finding a fiancé, and the dinner with Russo was looming large on the horizon. That morning, I decided to clear my head with a walk through the city. It was something I rarely did, stepping away from the office, from the endless emails and phone calls. But I needed a break. As I wandered through the streets, the city felt different, almost oppressive. The buildings seemed to close in around me, their towering heights a reminder of the pressure I was under. I walked past storefronts and cafes, the hum of life around me both comforting and alienating. It was then that I found myself in front of the public library. I hadn't set foot in one for years, ever since my assistant had taken over the task of ordering books for me, but something drew me inside. Maybe it was the nostalgia, the memory of that first book that had sparked my ambition all those years ago. Or maybe it was the need to lose myself in a place where the pressures of my life couldn't reach me. Whatever it was, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped inside. The library was quiet, a sanctuary from the chaos of the world outside. The smell of old books hit me immediately, a scent that carried with it a sense of comfort and familiarity. I wandered through the aisles, my fingers trailing along the spines of volumes that held the wisdom of centuries. For a moment, I forgot about Russo, about David, about the fiancé I had yet to find. All that mattered was the silence and the stories waiting to be discovered. And then, as I turned a corner, I saw her. She was standing on a small ladder, shelving books in a quiet corner of the library. Her long, dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a pair of round glasses that framed her face perfectly. There was an air of quiet confidence about her, a grace that made her seem almost out of place in the dusty, dimly lit room. As she reached for a book on a high shelf, her foot slipped, and she let out a small gasp, teetering dangerously on the edge of the ladder. Without thinking, I rushed forward, catching her arm just in time to steady her. "Careful," I said, my voice surprisingly gentle. She looked down at me, her blue eyes wide with surprise, and for a moment, we just stared at each. Chapter 2. A Proposal with Strings Attached. The early evening sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across my penthouse office as I finished up the day's work. The city's skyline, usually a source of pride, felt more like a cage tonight, the glittering buildings towering over me, reminding me of the stakes involved in the conversation I was about to have. The phone on my desk buzzed, snapping me out of my reverie. It was David. "Michael, I've got something big," he said, his voice crackling with excitement. The tension in his tone was palpable, a sure sign that this was more than just another deal. I leaned back in my chair, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm listening." "Leonardo Russo," David said, letting the name hang in the air for a moment. It was the name of a man who could change the course of our company's future in an instant. A kingmaker in the hospitality industry, Russo's approval could open doors that were previously sealed shut, doors that led to untapped markets and endless opportunities. I felt a jolt of adrenaline. Russo? What's he interested in? "He's planning a major expansion into North America," David explained, his voice vibrating with barely contained enthusiasm. "He's been watching us, Michael. He likes what we've done. Our innovative designs, the way we've captured the luxury market. He wants to meet with us and discuss a potential partnership." The implications were enormous. A partnership with Russo would put us on the map in ways that no other deal could. But even as my mind raced with the possibilities, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this. "There's a catch, isn't there?" I asked, my voice dropping into a more cautious tone. David hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "There is," he admitted. "Russo has some unique requirements when it comes to his business partners." "What kind of requirements?" "Russo is a traditionalist," David said, choosing his words carefully. "He values family connections, believes in doing business with men who are grounded by their personal lives. He insists on meeting with his partners and their fiancés." I felt like the ground had just shifted beneath my feet. Fiancés. The word came out more as a question than a statement. "Or wives," David added quickly, as if that somehow made it better. "But fiancés are preferred. Russell likes to know that the men he's dealing with are committed, both personally and professionally. He believes it says something about their character." The absurdity of the situation hit me all at once. Here I was, a self-made millionaire, on the verge of one of the biggest deals of my career, and I was being asked to produce a fiancé like some kind of commodity. The very idea was laughable, yet the gravity of the situation was anything but. "This is insane," I said, trying to wrap my head around the request. "You know I don't do relationships, David, let alone engagements. How the hell am I supposed to find a fiancé by next week?" "I know it's not ideal," David said, his tone shifting from excitement to seriousness. "But this is the opportunity we've been waiting for. Russo is old school, but he's also one of the most powerful men in the industry. If we pull this off, it could set us up for life. You just need to find someone who can play the part for a few days." Easier said than done. My life was meticulously organized, every detail carefully controlled. There was no room for unpredictability, no space for anything that couldn't be managed. And relationships? Those were the wildest variables of all. I had avoided them for years, ever since my heart had been shattered by a woman who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone. Since then, I had built walls around myself, walls that had protected me from distractions and allowed me to focus solely on my goals. But now those walls were closing in, and I had no choice but to break through them. "I'll see what I can do," I said finally, though the words felt hollow. "You've got this, Michael," David said, his voice full of confidence that I didn't share. "You're one of the smartest guys I know. Just treat this like any other business problem. Find the right candidate, make the offer, and seal the deal." As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel the weight of what was being asked of me. This wasn't just about business. It was about trust, about creating the illusion of a life that I had never wanted. And if I didn't pull it off, I stood to lose everything. I spent the rest of the evening poring over my contacts, considering every woman I'd met in the past few years. The problem was that most of them were too close to my world, too aware of my reputation. They would see through the act, and worse, they might start expecting something more. I needed someone who was distant enough to keep things professional but familiar enough to blend in seamlessly. The next morning, I decided to take a break from the search. I needed to clear my head, and the city streets offered the perfect distraction. As I wandered through the bustling avenues, my mind churned with possibilities. What I needed was a fresh perspective, something, or someone, unexpected. My steps took me to a part of the city I hadn't visited in years, a quiet neighborhood far removed from the high-stakes world I lived in. As I passed by the old public library, a wave of nostalgia washed over me. It was a place I had frequented in my youth, back when books were my only escape from the crushing weight of reality. On a whim, I decided to step inside. The familiar smell of old paper and leather bindings hit me the moment I crossed the threshold, and for the first time in days, I felt a sense of calm. Here, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, the pressures of the outside world seemed to fade away. I wandered through the aisles, lost in thought, until I noticed her. She was perched on a ladder, carefully reshelving books in a quiet corner of the library. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a pair of round glasses that gave her an air of quiet intelligence. There was something about her that caught my attention, something unassuming yet intriguing. As she reached for a book on a high shelf, her foot slipped, and she let out a small gasp. Without thinking, I moved quickly to steady the ladder, my hand brushing against hers as I did. She looked down at me, startled, her blue eyes wide with surprise. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice tinged with a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "No problem," I replied, offering her a small smile. "Are you all right?" She nodded, climbing down from the ladder with a grace that belied the near accident. "I'm fine, just a little clumsy today." As she stood in front of me, I couldn't help but notice how different she was from the women I usually encountered. There was no pretense, no calculated charm. Just a genuine warmth that seemed almost out of place in the cutthroat world I inhabited. I found myself lingering, curious to know more. "Do you work here?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. She nodded, a shy smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Yes, I'm the assistant librarian. My name's Emma." "Michael," I said, offering my hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Her handshake was firm, confident, and I found myself inexplicably drawn to her. There was something refreshing about her simplicity, a stark contrast to the complexity of my life. As I looked at her, an idea began to form in the back of my mind, one that was as audacious as it was absurd. She was perfect. "Emma," I began, my voice carefully measured, "I know this might sound strange, but I have a proposition for you." She tilted her head slightly, curiosity lighting up her eyes. "A proposition?" "Yes," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "I'm in need of someone to accompany me to a business dinner. Someone who can pretend to be my fiancée for the evening. It's purely a professional arrangement, and I'd be happy to compensate you for your time." For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You want me to pretend to be your fiancé?" she repeated, as if trying to make sure she had heard correctly. "I know it's an unusual request," I admitted, feeling a twinge of discomfort at the absurdity of the situation. "But I'm in a bit of a bind, and you seem like the perfect person for the role. You're intelligent, poised, and most importantly, you don't seem like the type who would be swayed by the superficial aspects of this arrangement." Emma's gaze was steady, searching my face for any sign of insincerity. "And why me specifically?" "Because you're different," I said simply. "You're not part of the world I'm used to, and that's exactly what I need. Someone who can step into this role without any preconceived notions or ulterior motives." She considered this for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she weighed the offer. "And what would I get out of this?" "A generous compensation," I said, leaning into my pitch. "Enough to cover whatever you might need, whether it's for your job, your studies, or anything else. And of course, there's the experience itself." The library's heavy oak doors creaked as I pushed them open, the sound echoing through the quiet space, like a reminder of the weight of the decision I was about to make. The smell of old paper and polished wood hit me as I stepped inside, a scent that transported me back to simpler times when books were my only refuge from the harsh realities of life. This place had always been a sanctuary, a world apart from the one I had built with brick, glass, and steel. But today, it felt like more than that. It felt like the last place where I could find the solution to my increasingly desperate problem. I wandered through the aisles, my mind racing with the implications of the conversation I'd had with Emma earlier. The assistant librarian had been the last person I'd expected to fill the role of my fiancée, but there was something about her, something that intrigued me in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was more than just her appearance, though that certainly helped. Emma was striking, with her long dark hair, bright blue eyes, and a natural elegance that she seemed completely unaware of. But it was her demeanor that had caught me off guard. She was calm, poised, and utterly unaffected by the trappings of wealth and power that usually defined my world. In a way, she was the antithesis of everything I had become, and that made her perfect for the role I needed her to play. As I approached the section where I had first seen her, I found myself uncharacteristically nervous. I had faced down boardrooms full of skeptical investors, negotiated deals worth millions, and yet the thought of asking this woman to pose as my fiancée for a weekend had me on edge. It wasn't just the absurdity of the situation, it was the risk involved. If she said no, or worse, if she said yes and things went wrong, It could spell disaster for the deal with Russo. I spotted Emma in the same aisle as before, standing on her tiptoes as she reached for a book on a high shelf. This time she was more careful, balancing herself with one hand while the other delicately retrieved the volume. There was something almost mesmerizing about the way she moved, as if she was in complete harmony with her surroundings. For a moment, I simply watched her, fascinated by the ease with which she navigated the library's quiet chaos. Finally, I cleared my throat, breaking the silence. Emma turned, her eyes widening slightly when she saw me. "Mr. Delgado," she greeted me, her voice soft but steady. "I didn't expect to see you back here so soon." "Please, call me Michael," I said, forcing a smile as I approached her. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she replied, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I wanted to talk to you about the proposition I mentioned earlier," I said, keeping my tone casual even as my heart pounded in my chest. Emma's expression shifted to one of curiosity mixed with caution. "The one where you need me to pretend to be your fiancé for a business dinner?" "Yes, that one," I said, trying not to feel embarrassed by how ridiculous it sounded when she said it out loud. "I know it's a strange request, but I wouldn't be asking if it weren't important." She didn't respond immediately, instead studying me with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through me. It was unnerving, being on the receiving end of such scrutiny. Most people in my world wouldn't dare look at me like that, not without some ulterior motive or hidden agenda. But Emma was different. She was genuinely trying to understand why I was asking her to do this, and that honesty was disarming. "Why me?" she asked finally, echoing the question from earlier. "Out of all the people you know, why ask a stranger like me?" I took a deep breath, knowing that honesty was my only option here. "Because you're not part of my world," I admitted. "You're not involved in my business, and you don't have any preconceived notions about who I am or what I do. That makes you the perfect candidate. You're intelligent, composed, and from what I've seen, you can handle yourself in any situation." Emma's eyes softened slightly, though she still looked skeptical. But why pretend at all? Why not just tell this Russo guy the truth? "Because Russo is old school," I explained, choosing my words carefully. "He values family and personal connections above all else. If he thinks I'm a lone wolf, he might see that as a liability. He wants to know that the people he's partnering with are stable, grounded by strong relationships. It's not just about business for him. It's personal. And if I don't play along, we could lose everything." She considered this for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, weighing the pros and cons, trying to decide if this was something she could or should get involved in. Part of me was terrified she would say no, but another part, the part I tried to keep buried, was scared she might say yes. "And you're sure I'm the right person for this?" she asked finally, her voice tinged with doubt. "I'm sure," I said firmly, though a part of me wondered if I was trying to convince myself as much as her. "I wouldn't be asking if I didn't think you could do it. And like I said, you'll be well compensated for your time. Enough to cover any expenses you might have with some left over." Emma hesitated, clearly conflicted. "I'm not doing this for the money," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's just, I'm not used to this kind of thing. It feels strange." "It is strange," I admitted, trying to ease her discomfort. "But sometimes strange is exactly what's needed. I know this is a lot to ask, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't think it was important. You're my best shot at making this work." There was a long silence as she mulled over my words, her brow furrowing in concentration. I could see the internal battle she was waging, the desire to help warring with her natural caution. Finally, she looked up at me, her expression resolute. "Okay," she said, the word coming out in a rush. "I'll do it." Relief flooded through me, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Thank you, Emma," I said sincerely. "You have no idea how much this means to me." She nodded, still looking a little unsure but determined. "Just tell me what I need to do." I smiled, trying to put her at ease. "All you have to do is be yourself. We'll attend the dinner together, act like a couple, and make a good impression. Russo isn't looking for anything flashy, He just wants to see that I have someone in my life who grounds me. We don't need to be overly affectionate or anything like that, just convincing." Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she managed a small smile. "I think I can handle that." We spent the next hour going over the details, discussing how we would present ourselves, what our story would be, and how we would handle any tricky questions that might arise. Emma was a quick study, asking thoughtful questions and coming up with ideas I hadn't even considered. The more we talked, the more I realized I had made the right choice. She was intelligent, adaptable, and more than capable of playing the role I needed her to. As we wrapped up our conversation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. This plan was risky, no doubt about it, but for the first time since David had brought up the idea, I felt a glimmer of hope. Emma was the key to making this work, and if we could pull it off, the rewards would be more than worth the risk. "Thank you again, Emma," I said as we stood by the library entrance. "I know this isn't something you ever expected to do, but I appreciate you taking a chance on me." She smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression that made my heart skip a beat. "You're welcome, Michael. I just hope I don't let you down." "You won't," I assured her, feeling more confident than I had in days. "I have no doubt you'll be perfect." As I left the library and stepped back into the bustling city streets, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building in my chest. This was it, the solution I had been searching for. Emma was the unlikely candidate, the one person who could make this crazy plan work. And as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this partnership might be the beginning of something far more significant than I had ever anticipated. The night of the dinner with Leonardo Russo arrived with an intensity I hadn't expected. The city outside my penthouse was alive with the buzz of nightlife, the streets below teeming with people oblivious to the stakes of the evening ahead. But inside my luxurious apartment, the air was thick with tension as I made my final preparations. My usual confidence felt like it was balanced on a knife's edge, threatened by the nagging fear that tonight might go horribly wrong. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the cuffs of my tailored suit. Everything about me screamed success. The sharp cut of my jacket, the gleam of my expensive watch, the confident set of my jaw. Yet beneath the polished exterior, I was a bundle of nerves. This dinner wasn't just another business meeting. It was a high-stakes gamble where one wrong move could cost me everything. Emma's voice, calm and reassuring, broke through my thoughts. "You look perfect, Michael." I turned to see her standing in the doorway, and for a moment, I forgot how to breathe. She was stunning. The modest blue dress she had chosen accentuated her figure in all the right ways, elegant yet understated. Her long dark hair was swept into a simple but sophisticated updo, and the blue of her dress made her eyes seem even more striking. She was every bit the poised and graceful fiancée I needed her to be. "You look incredible," I managed to say, still trying to wrap my head around the transformation. This wasn't the quiet librarian I'd met in the dusty aisles of a public library. This was a woman who could command any room she walked into. Emma smiled, a hint of nerves showing in her eyes. "I just hope I don't embarrass you tonight." "You won't," I assured her, offering my arm. "We've got this." As we made our way to the restaurant, I went over the details in my mind for what felt like the 1,000th time. We practiced our story, rehearsed our lines, and prepared for every possible question Russo might throw at us. But the truth was, there was no way to fully prepare for a man like Russo. He was as unpredictable as he was powerful, and that unpredictability was what made this dinner so dangerous. The Magnolia, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of the city, was the kind of place where deals worth millions were made over perfectly cooked steaks and glasses of rare wine. The air inside was heavy with the scent of truffle oil and aged leather, the low hum of conversation mingling with the clink of crystal glasses. It was a far cry from the quiet world Emma was used to, but she carried herself with a grace that belied her inexperience. As we were shown to our table, I could feel the eyes of the other diners on us. Curious, envious, appraising. But I kept my focus on the task at hand. This was a performance, and we had roles to play. Leonardo Russo was already seated when we arrived, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if he were sizing up every person there. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick head of silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard that gave him a regal appearance. Beside him sat his fiancée, Isabella, a statuesque blonde with a smile that was as cold as it was beautiful. David and his girlfriend, also named Isabella, were already there, deep in conversation. Russo looked up as we approached, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the sight of Emma on my arm. I could see the gears turning in his mind, assessing, calculating. This was the moment of truth. "Leonardo, good to see you again," I said, extending my hand with what I hoped was the right mix of confidence and respect. "Michael," Russo replied, shaking my hand firmly. His gaze shifted to Emma, and I could feel the weight of his scrutiny. "And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Emma," I said, turning to her with a smile that I hoped conveyed warmth and authenticity. "My fiancée." Emma smiled graciously, dipping her head in a slight nod. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Russo." "The pleasure is mine," Russo said, his eyes lingering on her a moment longer before he gestured for us to sit. "Please, join us." We took our seats, and as the waiter poured wine into our glasses, I couldn't help but notice the way Russo's eyes kept drifting back to Emma. He was intrigued, and that was both a good and a bad thing. On one hand, it meant she had made a strong first impression. On the other, it meant that any misstep would be scrutinized with even greater intensity. The conversation started smoothly enough. Russo and David exchanged pleasantries about business, while Isabella, the original one, chimed in with a few well-placed compliments about our recent projects. Emma played her part perfectly, engaging in the conversation just enough to seem interested without drawing too much attention to herself. But as the main course was served, Russo's questions became more pointed, his tone more probing. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine glass in one hand as he turned his gaze fully on Emma. "So Emma," he began, his voice deceptively casual, "tell me, how did you and Michael meet?" I felt a flicker of tension in the air, but Emma didn't miss a beat. We had prepared for this. "We met at a charity event," she said smoothly, her voice steady. "I was volunteering, and Michael was one of the major donors. We struck up a conversation, and, well, the rest is history." Russo smiled, but there was a glint in his eyes that made my stomach twist. "Charity work, That's admirable. And what is it that you do, Emma?" "I'm a librarian," she replied, her tone modest yet confident. "I work at the public library downtown." "A librarian," Russo mused, leaning forward slightly. "That's a noble profession, not something you see every day in our circles." I could feel the tension ratchet up another notch. Russo was digging, looking for weaknesses, for anything that might seem out of place. I opened my mouth to steer the conversation in a different direction, but Russo wasn't done. "Tell me, Michael," he said, his gaze shifting to me. "How does a man like you, with all your wealth and power, end up with a librarian? I imagine the women in your world would be lining up for a chance to be by your side." It was a test, and I knew it. He was trying to see if our story held water, if the connection between Emma and me was genuine or just a convenient arrangement. I could feel the eyes of everyone at the table on me, waiting for my response. But before I could answer, Emma spoke up, her voice soft but firm. "Michael has always valued substance over appearance," she said, her eyes locking onto Russo's. "That's one of the things I love about him. He sees people for who they are, not for what they have." Russo's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and I felt a surge of admiration for Emma's quick thinking. She had turned the question around, made it about something deeper, something that even Russo couldn't easily dismiss. For a moment, it seemed like we had navigated the tricky waters successfully. But then, as dessert was being served, the conversation took an unexpected turn. Russo set down his spoon, fixing me with a penetrating stare. "Michael, I've heard some interesting things about your recent projects in the city center," he said, his tone casual but laced with something darker. "Specifically, about a certain piece of land that was acquired under less than ideal circumstances." My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the implications were clear. This was more than just a business inquiry. It was a challenge, a test of my integrity. And it was a test I wasn't sure I could pass. I'm not sure what you're referring to, I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. All of our acquisitions have been above board. Is that so? Russo's eyes flicked to Emma, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. Perhaps your fiancé can shed some light on the matter. Emma's expression froze, and I could see the color drain from her face. My mind raced, trying to figure out what was happening. But before I could say anything, Emma spoke, her voice trembling slightly. My family's home, she said, barely above a whisper. It was in the city center. It was demolished to make way for one of Michael's hotels. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. I could feel the blood drain from my face as the full impact of what she had just said hit me. This was the one scenario we hadn't prepared for, the one piece of information I had never anticipated. Russo's expression darkened, his gaze locking onto me with a look of cold fury. Is this true, Michael? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I didn't know what to say, how to explain that I had no idea about Emma's family, about the house that had been destroyed. This was David's doing, I realized in a flash of horror. He had handled the city center projects while I was away, dealing with my mother's illness. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that Russo believed I was complicit. David shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face pale as he avoided my gaze. The night after the disastrous dinner with Leonardo Russo was the longest of my life. Sleep was an elusive ghost, slipping away each time I closed my eyes. Every time I tried to find rest, Emma's voice haunted me, her words replaying in my mind like a broken record. My family's home. It was demolished to make way for one of Michael's hotels. Those words had detonated like a bomb, destroying not just the fragile illusion we had constructed, but potentially my entire career. I had never felt so blindsided, so utterly out of control. All my meticulous planning, my calculated decisions had led to this, a complete unraveling in front of one of the most powerful men in the industry. When the sun finally crept over the horizon, painting the city in muted shades of gray, I couldn't stand the confines of my penthouse any longer. I needed answers. I needed to understand how everything had gone so wrong. More than anything, I needed to talk to Emma. The drive to the library was a blur, the city's familiar streets passing by unnoticed. The memory of Emma's face at the dinner, pale, shaken, yet resolute, gnawed at me. I had brought her into my world, and it had cost her dearly. The realization that I might have lost her trust, and perhaps something more, weighed heavily on my chest. As I pulled up to the library, a sense of dread settled over me. I had no idea how she would react to seeing me again, whether she would even be willing to talk, but I knew I had to try. I had to make things right, if that was even possible. The library was quiet, as it always was in the early hours. The smell of old books and the sight of dusty shelves provided a strange sense of comfort, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning inside me. As I walked through the aisles, I found myself hesitating, unsure of how to approach Emma after everything that had happened. When I finally found her, she was at the front desk, stacking a pile of books with a focus that seemed almost forced. Her normally calm demeanor was tinged with a tension I hadn't seen before. She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, there was a flash of something in her eyes. Hurt, anger, maybe even betrayal. But she quickly masked it, her expression settling into one of polite neutrality. "Michael," she greeted me, her voice steady but distant. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk," I said, trying to keep my own voice as calm as possible. "About last night." She sighed, setting down the book she had been holding. "There's nothing more to say. It happened, and now it's over." "Emma, please," I pleaded, stepping closer. "I didn't know. About your family's home, I mean. I had no idea. David was the one who handled those projects while I was away. If I had known." "But you didn't know," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "And that's the problem, isn't it? You didn't know, because you didn't care to know. It was just another deal to you, another step on your path to success. My family's home was collateral damage in your climb to the top." Her words cut deep, but I knew she was right. I had been so focused on building my empire, on proving myself, that I had lost sight of the people who were affected by my decisions. Emma's family was just one of many, and that realization was a bitter pill to swallow. You're right, I admitted, my voice heavy with regret. I was so consumed by my goals that I didn't stop to think about the consequences. And for that, I'm truly sorry. But Emma, I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. She looked at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. I could see the struggle in her eyes, the battle between her anger and the trust we had begun to build. Finally, she sighed, the tension in her shoulders easing just slightly. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, she said quietly. But that doesn't change the fact that it happened. My family lost everything because of a decision your company made, a decision you didn't even know about. How am I supposed to trust someone who doesn't even know what's happening in his own business? It was a fair question, one I didn't have a good answer for. Trust was a fragile thing, and I had shattered it without even realizing. But I couldn't walk away, not now, not when there was still a chance to make things right. I don't expect you to trust me right now, I said, meeting her gaze with as much sincerity as I could muster. But I want to earn it. I want to make amends, not just for what happened to your family, but for everything I've done that's hurt people along the way. Let me help you, Emma. Let me do something to make this right. Emma's eyes softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the warmth that had drawn me to her in the first place. But then she shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. You can't fix this, Michael, she said, her voice laced with resignation. What's done is done. The house is gone. My family has moved on, and I just want to put this all behind me. I felt a pang of desperation. Emma, please, just give me a chance. One chance to show you that I'm more than just the businessman who caused all this pain. I don't want this to be the end. She looked at me, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, the silence stretching out like an abyss between us. I held my breath, waiting for her decision, praying that she would give me that second chance. Finally, she sighed, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she said softly, one chance. But this isn't about money or power, Michael. If you want to make things right, you're going to have to prove that you actually care about the people you've hurt. Not just me, but everyone. Relief washed over me, but I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Earning Emma's trust again would take more than just words. It would take action, something tangible that showed her I was serious about changing. But I was willing to do whatever it took. Thank you, I said, my voice filled with gratitude. You won't regret this, Emma, I promise. She nodded, though her expression remained guarded. We'll see. As I left the library, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that she had given me a second chance, fear that I might not live up to her expectations, and a deep sense of determination. For the first time in a long time, my focus wasn't on closing a deal or expanding my empire. It was on something far more important, rebuilding the trust I had lost and proving to Emma and to myself that I was capable of more than just business acumen. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the task of making amends. I started by reaching out to David, demanding a full accounting of every project we had undertaken, particularly those that involved displacing residents. The more I learned, the more I realized just how disconnected I had become from the impact of my decisions. It was a sobering experience, one that made me question the very foundation of my success. But it wasn't enough to simply uncover the truth. I needed to take action. I arranged meetings with the families who had been affected by our developments, listening to their stories, their struggles. It was a humbling experience, one that forced me to confront the human cost of my ambition. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about profits or expansion. I was thinking about people and how I could make things right. And through it all, Emma was never far from my thoughts. I found myself replaying our conversations, her words echoing in my mind as I navigated this unfamiliar territory. There was a part of me that was terrified I would fail, that I would never be able to regain her trust. But another part of me, one that was growing stronger by the day, was determined to prove that I was more than just a ruthless businessman. After a few weeks, I returned to the library. This time, I wasn't there to apologize or make promises. I was there to show Emma what I had done, to let her see for herself that I was committed to change. She was at the front desk again, her expression softening slightly when she saw me. "Michael," she greeted me, her tone cautious but not unkind. "I didn't expect to see you again so soon." "I've been busy," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I've met with the families who were displaced by our projects. I've heard their stories, and I'm working on ways to make amends. It's going to take time, but I'm committed to seeing it through." Emma looked at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of deceit, but all she would find was sincerity. I'd meant every word. "And you're not just doing this for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head. "No, Emma. This is about more than just us. It's about me realizing that I've lost sight of what's important. I don't want to be the man who bulldozes over people's lives just to get ahead."